A cold wind howled across the Montana Territory as Xavier Blackburn rode into the small settlement of Hope's Crossing in 1876. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his arm, a souvenir from an encounter with outlaws 2 days back. The once white cloth had turned a rusty brown, much like the dying light of day that painted the western sky. Xavier had been tracking the Harlow Gang for 3 weeks, determined to bring them to justice after they'd murdered a family near Fort Benton. But tonight, with a storm brewing and his wound festering, justice would have to wait. The main street was quiet as dusk settled over the frontier town. Only the saloon showed signs of life, yellow lamplight spilling from its windows onto the muddy thoroughfare. Xavier's horse, a sturdy Palomino named Chief, snorted with exhaustion. They'd pushed hard through rough country, and both needed rest. "Just a bit further, boy," Xavier murmured, patting the horse's neck with his good hand. He spotted a modest building with a weathered sign reading O'Malley Boarding House and guided Chief toward the hitching post out front. Dismounting took more effort than it should have, and Xavier steadied himself against the saddle as a wave of dizziness passed through him. The wound was worse than he'd admitted to himself. A woman's voice called from the porch. "You all right, mister?" Xavier looked up to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway, a lantern held aloft in one hand. "Just need a room for the night," he managed, reaching for his saddlebag. The woman stepped forward into the light. She was perhaps 30, with chestnut hair pulled back from a face that might once have been carefree. Now worry lines creased her brow as she assessed him. "You're hurt," she stated matter-of-factly. Xavier nodded reluctantly. "It's nothing." "That doesn't look like nothing." She descended the steps with surprising quickness. "I'm Beatrice O'Malley. This is my establishment. Xavier Blackburn, pleased to make your acquaintance, madam." Beatrice's eyes narrowed as she noticed the badge partially concealed by his coat. "Marshal." "Deputy U.S. Marshal," he corrected, swaying slightly. "Well, Deputy Marshal Blackburn, you're about to fall over. Let me help you inside before you collapse in my yard." Too weak to argue, Xavier allowed Beatrice to take his good arm and lead him toward the house. Chief nickered anxiously behind them. "I'll see to your horse once you're settled," she assured him. The boarding house was modest but clean, with a central parlor warmed by a crackling fire. No other guests appeared to be present. "Slow season," Beatrice explained, noticing his gaze. "Most travelers are waiting out winter before heading through these parts." She guided him to a chair near the fire. "Let me see that arm." Xavier hesitated, then carefully removed his coat, wincing as the fabric pulled away from the wound. Beatrice's expression remained neutral, but he caught the slight widening of her eyes. "That needs cleaning, and quick. You're lucky it's not mortified yet." She moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey and some clean cloth. "This will hurt." Xavier managed a smile. "Not my first bullet wound, madam." "Beatrice," she corrected. "And I wasn't warning you, I was warning myself. Never easy watching a man suffer, even when it's necessary." As she worked, Xavier noticed a gold band on her left hand. "Your husband around to help with this place?" Something flickered in her eyes before she replied. "Thomas passed 2 winters ago, pneumonia. I'm sorry. As am I." Her hands remained steady as she cleaned his wound. "This bullet needs to come out," Xavier nodded. "I suspected as much. I've done it before, for Thomas and others." "I trust you." Beatrice paused, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. Something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps. She'd seen pain, he'd caused it. Both knew its cost. "Drink," she ordered, passing him the whiskey bottle. Xavier took a long pull, then another. The liquor burned a path to his stomach, spreading warmth through his chilled body. "Tell me about the Harlow Gang," Beatrice said as she prepared her tools. "That's who you're after, isn't it? Word travels, even to small places like Hope's Crossing." Xavier was surprised. "You've heard of them." 4 men, led by Samuel Harlow. They robbed the bank in Billings last month, killed the teller. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "They stayed here before I knew who they were." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Did they harm you?" "No." Beatrice met his eyes again. "But they frightened my daughter." "You have a child?" "Emma, she's 8. She's staying with my sister in town tonight." Relief washed over Xavier. He wouldn't want a child to hear a man's screams, and scream he might despite his best intentions. "Ready." Beatrice asked, holding up a pair of metal tweezers that gleamed in the firelight. Xavier nodded, taking another swig of whiskey. As I'll ever be. Beatrice worked with practiced efficiency, her face a mask of concentration as she extracted the bullet from his flesh. Xavier bit down hard on a leather strap she'd provided, muffling his groans. When the bullet finally came free with a sickening sound, he slumped back, sweat-soaked and trembling. "The worst is over," Beatrice murmured, applying a poultice to the wound before bandaging it. "You've lost blood, but the wound is clean now. You need rest." Xavier wanted to protest that he needed to continue his pursuit, but exhaustion claimed him. He allowed Beatrice to help him to a room upstairs, where a simple bed with clean sheets awaited. "Thank you," he managed as she turned to leave. Beatrice paused in the doorway. "Rest, deputy. Your outlaws won't get far in this weather." As if summoned by her words, rain began to patter against the window, quickly building to a downpour. Xavier listened to Beatrice's footsteps descend the stairs, then surrendered to a deep, healing sleep. Morning brought clarity and pain in equal measure. Xavier woke to sunlight filtering through thin curtains and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from below. His arm throbbed, but the fever had broken. When he managed to sit up, he found clean clothes laid out on a chair beside the bed, not his own, but they would fit. A basin of fresh water stood ready. Making his way downstairs took longer than he'd have liked, each step reminding him of yesterday's weakness. In the kitchen, he found Beatrice at the stove, her back to him. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough from sleep. She turned, and Xavier was struck by how the morning light softened her features. "You're up. Good. I was beginning to worry." "What time is it?" "Nearly 10. You needed the sleep." She gestured to a chair. "Sit, eat." Xavier obeyed, suddenly aware of his hunger. "I need to check on Chief." "Your horse is fine, fed and watered." Beatrice placed a plate before him, eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming. "Emma's been brushing him all morning. She's quite taken with the marshal's horse, as she calls him." As if on cue, the door opened, and a small figure burst in, bringing the crisp autumn air with her. Emma O'Malley had her mother's eyes and an unruly mop of chestnut curls. "Mama, the marshal's awake," she exclaimed, then stopped short, suddenly shy in Xavier's presence. "Deputy Marshal," Beatrice corrected gently. "And what do we say to guests?" Emma curtsied awkwardly. "Good morning, sir." Xavier couldn't help but smile. "Good morning, Miss Emma. I hear you've been taking care of my horse." The girl nodded enthusiastically. "He likes apples." "I gave him one of ours. That's all right, isn't it?" "That's just fine. Chief appreciates your kindness." Emma beamed, then turned to her mother. "Can I show him the kittens later, if the deputy feels up to it?" Beatrice gave her daughter a look that sent her scurrying to wash her hands. "Emma lost her father when she was 6, she said quietly once the girl was out of earshot. "She misses having a man around." Xavier nodded, understanding the unspoken message. "Don't encourage attachment." "I won't be staying long, need to get back on the Harlow's trail." Something like disappointment flickered in Beatrice's eyes, but she nodded. "Of course, your duty. They've hurt too many people already, and if you don't stop them, who will?" There was no judgment in her voice, only resignation. They ate in companionable silence until Emma returned, full of 8-year-old energy and questions about life as a marshal. Xavier answered patiently, editing his responses for young ears but never lying. He'd seen too many children raised on false notions of glory only to discover the harsh realities too late. "Have you ever killed a bad man?" Emma asked suddenly. "Emma," Beatrice admonished, but Xavier held up a hand. "It's a fair question." He looked at the girl seriously. "Yes, I have. But I never wanted to. Taking a life is the last thing any lawman should want to do." Emma considered this. "But sometimes you have to." "Sometimes there's no other choice," he admitted, "but I always look for another way first." Emma nodded, apparently satisfied. "The kittens are in the barn." "There are 4 of them. The orange one is my favorite." After breakfast, true to his word, Xavier allowed Emma to lead him to the barn where a mother cat had made a nest in the hay. The kittens were barely 2 weeks old, their eyes just opening to the world. Emma handled them with surprising gentleness for a child her age. "Mama says we can't keep them all," she confided, "but I'm hoping she'll let me keep the orange one. I want to name him Sheriff." Xavier laughed, the sound surprising him. It had been a long time since he'd laughed genuinely. That's a fine name for a cat. They returned to find Beatrice hanging laundry in the yard. The domestic scene struck Xavier with unexpected force: the neat house, the woman working in the yard, the child chattering happily. It was everything he'd never allowed himself to want. The storm washed out the north road, Beatrice informed him as they approached. Jenkins from the Mercantile says it'll be at least 2 days before it's passable. Xavier frowned. 2 days could mean the difference between catching the Harlows and losing their trail completely. But he also knew attempting the crossing in its current condition would be foolhardy at best, fatal at worst. "I suppose I'm your guest a bit longer then, madam." "I suppose you are," was that relief in her voice. "Your arm needs more time to heal anyway." That evening, after Emma had been put to bed with a story about brave lawmen that only slightly exaggerated Xavier's exploits, Beatrice invited him to sit by the fire. She poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to him. "To unexpected delays," she toasted with the hint of a smile. Xavier clinked his glass against hers. "And kind hostesses." The fire crackled between them, casting warm light across Beatrice's features. In its glow, Xavier could see traces of the young woman she must have been before life had carved its lines into her face. "How long have you been a widow?" he asked quietly. 2 years, 4 months, and 16 days. Beatrice stared into the flames. "But who's counting?" "I'm sorry, that was thoughtless of me." She shook her head. "No, it's all right. Thomas was a good man, a carpenter. We came out here from Pennsylvania because he heard there was work building the new settlements, and there was for a time." "What happened?" "Winter happened. A particularly harsh one. Thomas took ill after helping to dig out the Wilsons' place after a blizzard. By the time the doctor could get through, it was too late." Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around her glass. "I decided to stay, turn our home into a boarding house. It seemed easier than starting over somewhere else." Xavier nodded, "And Emma had already lost enough." "Yes." Beatrice looked up at him. "What about you, deputy? Any family waiting somewhere for your safe return?" "No." The word held all the loneliness of his chosen path. "My parents died when I was young, raised by my uncle, a sheriff in Wyoming Territory. Following in his footsteps seemed natural." "And no wife, no children?" Her question was gentle, without pressure. Hard to ask a woman to share this life. Xavier gestured to his wounded arm. "Never knowing if I'll come home or when. Some women might make that choice given the opportunity." Their eyes met across the space between them, and for a moment, Xavier allowed himself to imagine a different life, one with a home to return to, with Beatrice waiting at the door, Emma running to meet him. The moment broke when a log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. "I should turn in," Xavier said, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of his thoughts. "Thank you for the whiskey and the company." Beatrice nodded, something like disappointment crossing her face. "Good night, deputy." That night, Xavier dreamed of the Harlow Gang, of blood on snow, of a faceless woman calling his name from a porch he could never quite reach. He woke before dawn, restless and determined. His arm felt better, still painful, but the wound was clean and healing. He dressed quietly and made his way downstairs, intending to check on Chief and perhaps reconnoiter the North Road himself. He was surprised to find Beatrice already awake, kneading dough in the kitchen by lamplight. "You're up early," she observed without looking up. "As are you." "Boarding house doesn't run itself." She punched down the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "You're thinking of trying the North Road." It wasn't a question. Xavier sighed. "I've lost too much time already, and you'll lose more if you drown in the creek." Now she did look up, her expression challenging. "The road won't be safe until tomorrow at the earliest. I've crossed worse. And is catching these men worth dying for?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Xavier had no answer that would satisfy either of them. Instead, he changed the subject. "Can I help with anything? Seems unfair for you to do all the work while I sit idle." Surprise flickered across Beatrice's face, followed by a small smile. "There's wood needs chopping. If your arm is up to it, I think I can manage." The physical labor felt good after days of inactivity. Xavier lost himself in the rhythm of swinging the axe, ignoring the occasional twinge from his wounded arm. The sun rose higher, burning away the morning mist. From the corner of his eye, he could see Beatrice moving about the yard, hanging more laundry, feeding chickens, checking her small vegetable garden. Once, their eyes met across the yard, and she smiled a genuine smile that transformed her face. Emma emerged later, still in her nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She watched Xavier work for a while, then disappeared into the barn, returning with the orange kitten nestled against her chest. "Sheriff wants to watch too," she announced, settling on a nearby stump. Xavier laughed. "Is that so? Well, Sheriff, I hope my technique meets with your approval." The kitten mewed, and Emma giggled. The sound warmed something in Xavier's chest that had been cold for too long. They spent the day in domestic harmony that felt both foreign and strangely right to Xavier. He repaired a loose shutter, helped Beatrice move furniture to clean behind it, and even allowed Emma to teach him a clapping game she'd learned at school. By evening, his resolve to check the North Road had faded. After Emma was asleep, Beatrice once again invited him to sit by the fire. This time she brought a mending basket instead of whiskey, her fingers working deftly as they talked. "You're good with her," Beatrice said after a comfortable silence. "Emma, I mean, not many men have patience for a child's chatter." Xavier shrugged. "She's a good kid. Reminds me of my cousin Lily at that age, always full of questions. She misses having a father." Beatrice's needle flashed in the firelight. "I try to be both for her, but there are things I can't give her." "You're doing a fine job from what I can see," Beatrice smiled sadly. "It's hard running this place alone, keeping up with everything, being strong for her." She set down her mending. "I never intended to speak so freely. Something about you makes it easy to talk." "I've been told I have an honest face," Xavier offered. "No," Beatrice shook her head. "It's more than that. You listen, truly listen." She hesitated, then added softly, "It gets lonely, Xavier, the nights especially." The use of his given name shifted something between them. Xavier met her gaze across the hearth, saw the invitation there and the vulnerability beneath it. "Beatrice," he began, uncertain of what to say next. She saved him from having to decide. "I'm not asking for promises. I've learned better than to expect those. She took a deep breath. "It hurts less when you don't leave." The simple honesty of her words struck him like a physical blow. Xavier moved to sit beside her on the settee, taking her hand in his. "I have a duty," he said quietly. "I know." She didn't pull away. "But not tonight. Tonight you're here." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Her lips were soft, yielding, then insistent. Xavier pulled her closer, his wounded arm forgotten in the need to hold her. Beatrice's hands found their way to his face, his neck, his chest, as if assuring herself of his solidity, his presence. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching. "Stay," she whispered. "Just for tonight." Xavier nodded, unable to deny her or himself this moment of connection. They moved together to her bedroom at the back of the house, away from Emma's room, closing the door on the world outside. In the darkness, they found comfort in each other's arms, their bodies speaking what words could not. Afterward, lying with Beatrice's head on his chest, Xavier stared at the ceiling, wondering how he had found this unexpected harbor in the midst of his pursuit. "What are you thinking?" Beatrice asked sleepily. "That I wish things were different." She propped herself up on one elbow, her hair falling around her face like a curtain. "Different how? That I wasn't who I am, that I could stay." Beatrice touched his face gently. "I wouldn't want you to be anyone else. Your sense of duty is part of who you are, Xavier. I wouldn't change that." "Even if it means I ride out tomorrow?" Her smile was sad but genuine. "Even then." They fell asleep tangled together, the weight of tomorrow temporarily lifted from both their shoulders. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the news that the North Road was passable again. Jenkins from the Mercantile confirmed it when he delivered supplies to the boarding house. "Still rough in places," he warned, "but a good rider could make it through." Xavier nodded his thanks, aware of Beatrice's stillness beside him. They hadn't spoken much since waking, both acutely conscious of the impending separation. Emma was less reserved. "Do you have to go today?" she asked over breakfast, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Sheriff will miss you." Xavier reached across the table to tap her hand gently. "I have a job to finish, Miss Emma, but I promise you this: when it's done, I'll come back to see you and Sheriff." Emma brightened. Really, you promise? Xavier met Beatrice's gaze over her daughter's head. I promise. Something shifted in Beatrice's expression, not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. After breakfast, Xavier packed his few belongings and prepared Chief for the journey. The Palomino seemed reluctant to leave the comfortable barn, but perked up when Emma brought him a final apple. Beatrice appeared as Xavier was tightening Chief's saddle. She carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. Food for the trail, she explained, handing it to him, and fresh bandages for your arm. Thank you. Xavier secured the bundle to his saddlebag. For everything, you don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. Xavier turned to face her fully. You saved more than my arm, Beatrice. She understood his meaning. Will you really come back, or was that just to comfort Emma? Xavier reached for her hand, holding it between both of his. I meant it. Once the Harlows are brought to justice, I'll return, if you'll have me. For how long? I don't know, he admitted honestly, but I want to find out what this could be between us. Beatrice stepped closer, her free hand coming to rest on his chest. I'll be here, we both will. Their goodbye kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a conclusion. Emma raced out to give Xavier a drawing she'd made of Chief, which he carefully folded and tucked inside his coat, close to his heart. As he mounted up, Xavier looked back at the pair standing on the porch of the boarding house, the woman with quiet strength in her eyes, the child waving enthusiastically, the home they'd created together. Something tugged at him, stronger than any pull he'd ever felt. I'll return, he called. You have my word. Beatrice nodded, her hand raised in farewell. We'll be waiting. Xavier turned Chief northward, toward his duty and the men he'd sworn to bring to justice. But for the first time in his life as a lawman, he rode with a destination beyond his mission, a place where the fire burned warm, where a widow and her daughter waited, where perhaps he might find the home he'd never known he was searching for. 3 weeks later, a battered but triumphant Xavier Blackburn rode back into Hope's Crossing. The Harlow Gang was finished 2 dead in a shootout, Samuel Harlow and his brother captured and awaiting trial in Billings. Xavier bore a new scar on his shoulder from the final confrontation, but his step was lighter as he dismounted in front of the O'Malley boarding house. Before he could knock, the door flew open. Emma burst out, followed more sedately by Beatrice, whose face transformed with joy at the sight of him. You came back, Emma cried, flinging herself at him. Xavier lifted her with his good arm, spinning her once before setting her down. I promised, didn't I? Over Emma's head, his eyes met Beatrice's. The question in them was clear. How long can you stay this time? Beatrice asked softly. Xavier reached into his coat and produced an official-looking document. I've requested a transfer to the Marshal's office in Billings. It would mean being stationed nearby, permanently. Beatrice's eyes widened. Permanently, if that suits you. Xavier stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. I've had enough of leaving, Beatrice. I want to stay with you, with Emma. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes as she nodded. It suits me very well indeed. That evening, as snow began to fall outside, Xavier sat by the fire in what was no longer a boarding house guest room but his home. Beatrice curled beside him, her head on his shoulder. Emma played on the floor with Sheriff, now a growing kitten with a penchant for mischief. The domesticity of the scene no longer felt foreign to Xavier, but right as if all his years of wandering had been leading him here. What are you thinking? Beatrice asked, echoing her question from that first night together. Xavier smiled, pulling her closer. That it hurts less when you don't leave. Beatrice lifted her face to his, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Then don't. I won't, he promised, and sealed it with a kiss. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Hope's Crossing in a blanket of white. But inside, by the fire, Xavier Blackburn had found something he'd never expected: a family, a future, and a love worth staying for.